Captain Deho pressed his face against the cold metal window of the massive space station. His breath made small clouds on the glass as he watched ships from 12 different worlds dock at the station. One by one alien beings stepped out of their vessels and walked through the gleaming corridors. Today was special. Today was the day humans would tell their stories to the galaxy for the first time ever. The heroic Thales festival happened every 5 years, and this time, Earth had been invited. Deho felt his heart beating fast with excitement and worry. Would the other species like human stories? Would they understand what made humans special? The observation deck was huge, bigger than any building Deho had ever seen back on Earth. Colorful lights danced on the walls and strange music filled the air. The ceiling was made of clear glass, showing the stars and planets outside. It was beautiful, but also scary to see how small Earth looked from here. Aliens of all shapes and sizes walked around the deck. Some looked like giant lizards with shiny scales. Some looked like walking trees with too many arms. Others seemed to be made of living crystal that sparkled when they moved. A few looked like they were swimming in the air, even though there was no water. Commander Mi Young stood near the center of the deck, checking her notes one more time. She was going to be the one to tell the human story today. She had practiced for months back on Earth. Her uniform was perfectly clean and her hair was tied back neatly. She looked brave, but Deho could see her hands shaking just a little. The festival moderator was a tall being with 4 eyes and skin that changed colors. He raised his arms and spoke in a voice that sounded like music. The universal translator in Deho's ear made the words clear. We welcome all species to share the greatest stories of heroism from your worlds. The first story came from the Vorthak people. A massive creature named Grymax stepped forward. He was 3 times taller than any human, with muscles bigger than tree trunks. His skin looked like it was made of stone and his eyes glowed red. He told a story about their greatest warrior who could lift mountains and punch through solid metal with his bare hands. The crowd cheered and clapped as Grymax acted out the battles. Next came the Zephyans, who looked like living diamonds. They sang their story instead of speaking. It was about a hero who could control lightning and make storms obey her commands. Their voices sounded like wind chimes and made beautiful music. The other aliens swayed to the rhythm and seemed amazed by the tale. The Hexans told their story through clicking sounds and hand movements. They had 6 arms each and could move faster than the eye could see. Their hero could be in 10 places at once and had defeated an entire army by moving so fast that the enemies never saw him coming. The audience gasped at the incredible speed described in the tale. One by one, each species shared stories of heroes with amazing powers. Some could fly through space without ships, others could read minds or see the future. A few could change their shape or become invisible. Each story seemed more impossible than the last, and each hero had abilities that no normal being could ever hope to have. Finally, it was Earth's turn. Commander Mi Young walked to the center of the deck. Her footsteps seemed very quiet after all the heavy stomping and clicking of the other species. She cleared her throat and began to speak. In her clear, steady voice, she told them about Hyun Woo, a human soldier from long ago. He was just an ordinary man with no special powers, no super strength, no magic abilities. He was defending his village from enemy soldiers who wanted to destroy everything he loved. The enemies had better weapons and more soldiers, but Hyun Woo would not give up. Mi Young described how Han Woo used his knowledge of the local area to set traps and slow down the enemy army. She explained how he moved from position to position, always staying one step ahead of the soldiers trying to catch him. For 3 days and 3 nights he fought without rest, using every trick he could think of. She told them how Hyun Woo was wounded early in the battle but kept fighting even though he was bleeding and in pain. She described how he saved the children and old people in the village by giving them time to escape to safety, and finally she told them how he held off the entire enemy army until help could arrive. At first the alien audience listened politely. Their many different types of eyes watched Mi Young as she spoke. But as the story went on, something changed. Small sounds began to come from the crowd, quiet chuckles at first, then louder laughs. A deep rumbling sound came from Grymax, the giant Vorthak warrior. He was trying not to laugh, but failing. The sound grew louder until it became a full belly laugh that shook the deck. Humans think one tiny creature can fight Hundreds of soldiers, he roared. That is very funny. The Zephyrians began making tinkling sounds like broken glass. This was their way of laughing. The sound grew louder as more of them joined in. The crystalline beings sparkled brighter as they found the human story amusing. The Hexans started clicking their mandibles rapidly, which meant they were laughing too. Their 6 arms waved in the air as they found the idea of one human defeating many enemies to be ridiculous. Even the peaceful Aquarians, who rarely showed strong emotions, began making bubbling sounds underwater, which was how they showed amusement soon. The entire deck was filled with the sounds of alien laughter. Every species was making their own version of laughing sounds. The noise was so loud that it echoed off the walls and ceiling. Mi Young tried to continue her story, but her voice was lost in the chaos of amusemento. Felt his cheeks turn red with embarrassment. He wanted to hide somewhere far away. The other humans on the station looked down at the floor, not wanting to meet anyone's eyes. This was supposed to be their moment to shine, their chance to show the galaxy what humans were capable of. Instead, they were being laughed at like children telling silly made-up stories. The laughter went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. When it finally died down, the aliens began talking among themselves in their various languages. The universal translator picked up fragments of their conversations. Humans are so weak and small. How could they imagine such impossible things? Do they really believe these stories, or are they just entertaining fiction? These poor creatures must live in a dream world if they think they can accomplish such feats. Mi Young finished her story quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. The audience clapped politely, but it was clear they thought it was just a funny tale, not a real example of heroism. She walked back to where the other humans were standing, her head held high, but her eyes showing the hurt she felt as the festival continued with more stories from other species. Daeho noticed someone he had not seen before. A reptilian being sat quietly in the corner of the deck. His scales were dark green and his large golden eyes seemed to be studying everything carefully. Unlike the others, he had not laughed at the human story. Instead, he had leaned forward and listened with great attention. This being was a Saurian, and his name was Vex. He had been coming to these festivals for many years, but he rarely spoke. He preferred to listen and learn. But today, something was different. Today he had heard something that the others had missed completely, while everyone else laughed at what they saw as an impossible story. Vex recognized something that made his scales tingle with excitement. He had spent decades studying the histories of different species, and what he had just heard was not impossible at all. In fact, it was exactly the kind of thing that made humans the most remarkable species in the entire galaxy. The other aliens continued to chatter and laugh about the amusing human tale, not knowing that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had no idea that sitting quietly in the corner was someone who knew the truth about human courage, someone who was about to change everything they thought they knew about strength and heroism forever. The laughter from the alien crowd was finally dying down, but the damage was already done. Captain Daeho could see the hurt in Commander Mi Young's eyes. Even though she tried to keep her face calm and professional, the other human delegates stood together in a small group, looking like they wanted to disappear into the metal floor of the space station. More alien species began sharing their heroic tales after the humans. A group of floating jellyfish-like beings called the Ethereals told a story about their champion who could phase through solid matter and become invisible at will. Their hero had stopped an entire invasion by walking through enemy ships and disabling them from the inside. The crowd was amazed and made appreciative. Sounds the rock like granite. People shared a tale of their strongest warrior who could survive in the vacuum of space without any protection. This hero had literally punched asteroids out of their path to save a whole planet. The audience gasped in wonder at such incredible strength and durability. A new story made the human tale seem even more ridiculous by comparison. These aliens had heroes who could do impossible things with powers beyond imagination, and here humans had shared a story about an ordinary man with no special abilities who just refused to give up. The whispers continued among the alien delegates. Daeho could hear fragments through his universal translator. Poor humans, they do not understand what real strength means. Their stories are like children playing pretend games. How can they expect us to believe such weak creatures could accomplish anything meaningful? Just when it seemed like the mockery would never end, something unexpected happened. A tall figure slowly rose from the corner of the observation deck where he had been sitting quietly throughout the entire festival. It was Thex the Saurian that Deho had noticed earlier. Thex was impressive to look at even among all these strange alien beings. He stood nearly 7 feet tall with dark green scales that seemed to shimmer under the station's artificial lights. His golden eyes were large and intelligent, and when he moved there was a grace to his movements that suggested great strength. His long tail helped him balance as he walked toward the center of the deck. The crowd fell silent as Thex approached. This was unusual. The Saurians were known throughout the galaxy as scholars and researchers. They rarely participated in festivals like this, preferring to observe and study rather than share stories. Everyone was curious about what this quiet reptilian being had to say. Thex stopped in the center of the deck where all the other storytellers had stood. His voice was deep and rumbling, like distant thunder. When he finally spoke, "I request permission to share a story with this gathering." The festival moderator looked surprised. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this unexpected request. Saurians never told stories at these festivals, but curiosity won over surprise, and he gestured for Thex to proceed. Thex looked around the room slowly, his golden eyes taking in every alien face. Then he turned to look directly at the human delegates. Captain Deho felt a chill run down his spine when those ancient eyes focused on him. There was something in that gaze that he had never seen before from any non-human being. It looked almost like respect. "I wish to tell you about a human warrior I have studied extensively," Thex began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent deck. "But before I do that, let me ask all of you something." He paused and looked around the room again. "How many of your heroes needed special powers, enhanced strength, or magical abilities to perform their legendary feats?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The alien delegates began murmuring among themselves as they considered what Thex was asking. It was true. Most of their heroes had been born with incredible abilities or had gained special powers through magic or technology. Gramax, the giant Vorthak warrior, was the first to respond. "Our greatest heroes have always possessed the natural strength of our people and weapons, forged by ancient magic." The Zephyrian delegate, Lyra, chimed in with her musical voice. "Our champions are born with the ability to control the forces of nature itself." One by one other species acknowledged that their heroes had indeed possessed supernatural abilities. The Hexans had natural speed and multiple limbs. The granite people had bodies harder than diamonds. The ethereals could phase through matter. None of them had heroes who were just ordinary members of their species. Thex nodded slowly as if he had expected these answers. "Now let me tell you about the human warrior I have studied." His voice grew more serious and somehow more compelling. "He had no special powers, no enhanced strength, no magical weapons. He was by all your standards utterly ordinary." The room buzzed with skeptical energy. Some of the aliens who had laughed at the human story earlier began making dismissive sounds, but Thex raised one clawed hand for silence. Yet he continued, "What this ordinary human accomplished makes your mightiest heroes look like children playing games." Captain Deho felt his heart skip a beat. This alien was defending humanity, but why? What could he possibly know about human achievements that would make him stand up against an entire room full of skeptical beings? Commander Mi Young took a step forward, her eyes wide with surprise and hope. She had given up on salvaging anything from this disaster of a presentation. But now this unexpected ally was offering them a chance. Thex reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small device. The device projected a hologram in the air above his hand. It showed what looked like official documents and records. "These are not stories or legends," he announced. "These are verified historical records, military documents, eyewitness testimonies, medical reports, all documented and confirmed through decades of careful research." The hologram changed to show images of battlefields and soldiers. The quality was remarkable, showing details that proved these were real historical records, not fictional tales. "This is the story of a human named Jun Saik Deho." Had never heard this name before, but something about the way Thex spoke it with such reverence made him pay close attention. Mi-young was leaning forward, now completely focused on what this Saurian scholar was about to reveal. Jun Saik was stationed at a strategic mountain pass with only 47 other human soldiers. Thex continued the holographic display, showing a narrow, rocky passage between 2 steep cliffs. They were ordered to hold this position against an advancing enemy force. The hologram shifted to show what looked like an endless sea of enemy soldiers, vehicles, and weapons. The numbers were staggering. Even Daeho, who had military training, could see that this was an impossible situation. 15,000 enemy soldiers, Vex announced, letting the number sink. In heavy artillery, armored vehicles, air support. By any logical military calculation, Junseek and his men should have retreated immediately or surrendered to save their lives, but humans, Vex said, his scales changing color slightly with what seemed like emotion, do not always follow logical calculations. The alien audience was completely silent now. Even those who had been most dismissive of human capabilities were listening intently. There was something in Vex's voice and in the evidence he was presenting that demanded attention. What happened next? Vex continued. Changes everything we thought we knew about courage, determination, and the nature of heroism itself. For 3 days and 3 nights, these 48 humans held that pass against overwhelming odds. He paused and looked directly at the humans in the audience. They used tactics that our military experts still study today. They showed a level of determination that our psychologists cannot fully explain. And they achieved something that our best computer simulations say was mathematically impossible. The room was so quiet that the only sound was the hum of the space station's engines. Everyone was waiting to hear how this story would unfold. Captain Daeho felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized that finally someone understood what humans were truly capable of. But the most remarkable part, Vex said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, was not just that they succeeded, it was how they succeeded and at what cost, and what Junseek himself endured to make it possible. Holographic display began showing medical records, and Daeho could see that whatever was coming next would change everything the galaxy thought about his species forever. The holographic display above Vex's hand began to show detailed battlefield maps and tactical positions. Every alien in the room leaned forward to get a better look at what the Saurian scholar was revealing. The images were incredibly detailed, showing every rock, every tree, every defensive position in the mountain. Junseek was 24 years old. Vex began, his voice steady and clear. Like all humans, he was small by galactic standards, 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing 160 pounds. His bones could be broken by a child from most of your species. His skin offered no protection from even the smallest weapons. The hologram showed a medical scan of human anatomy compared to other species present. The contrast was shocking. Humans looked incredibly fragile next to the armored Vorthek, the crystalline Zephyrians, or even the multi-limbed Hexans. Captain Daeho had never really thought about how weak humans must appear to other species, but seeing it displayed like this was humbling. Yet this fragile being, Vex continued, was put in command of the mountain pass defense. The hologram shifted to show the tactical situation from above. 48 human soldiers in defensive positions spread across a narrow valley with steep cliffs on both sides. The enemy force that approached them was massive. Vex gestured, and the display showed wave after wave of enemy soldiers, vehicles and aircraft. 15,000 troops, supported by heavy artillery, tanks, and airstrikes. Any military computer in the galaxy will tell you that the logical response would be immediate retreat or surrender, but Junseek made a different choice. The holographic display began playing what looked like actual footage from the battle. The quality was grainy but clear enough to see small human figures moving between rocks and defensive positions. They looked like ants compared to the massive force advancing toward them. The first day of battle was chaos, Vex narrated as the images played. Enemy artillery pounded the human positions for hours. The noise alone would drive most species to madness, but watch what the humans do. The footage showed human soldiers moving with purpose even under heavy bombardment. They used the rocky terrain to their advantage, setting up crossfires and kill zones. They moved supplies and ammunition through covered routes they had prepared in advance. Every movement looked carefully planned. Junseek was hit by shrapnel during the first artillery barrage. Vex announced. The hologram showed medical records with timestamps. A piece of metal tore through his left shoulder, missing major arteries by less than an inch. Any reasonable being would seek medical evacuation. Instead, Junseek used field medical supplies to stop the bleeding and continued commanding his troops. The battle footage continued showing human soldiers holding impossible positions. The enemy had overwhelming numbers, but the humans used every trick they could think of. They collapsed parts of the cliff to create barriers, they set fires to provide smoke cover, they used captured enemy weapons when their own ammunition ran low. The most incredible thing, Vex said, was their coordination under constant attack with limited communication. Equipment. These humans moved like a single organism. Each soldier knew exactly what the others were doing without needing detailed orders, Commander. Mi-young wiped tears from her eyes as she watched humans like herself doing impossible things. The footage was grainy and old, but she could see the determination in their movements. These were her people, showing the galaxy what they were really made of. The second day was worse. Vex continued. More enemy reinforcements arrived. The artillery bombardment intensified. Enemy aircraft began strafing runs against the human positions. And Junseek was wounded again. The medical records showed a bullet wound through his right thigh that had damaged muscle and bone. Most species would be unable to walk with such an injury, but the battle footage showed Junseek still moving between positions, still coordinating his troops' defense. The humans adapted their tactics, Vex explained. They realized they could not win through conventional warfare, so they began using psychological warfare against the enemy. The hologram showed examples: night raids where small groups of humans would sneak into enemy camps and sabotage equipment. Fake radio transmissions that confused enemy communications, carefully placed explosives that made small forces seem much larger. The enemy commanders began to believe they were facing a much larger force than 48 soldiers. Their own reports show confusion and fear about human capabilities they did not understand. On the third day, the situation became desperate. The enemy launched a final massive assault, determined to break through the pass at any cost. The artillery bombardment was so intense that it shook mountains on both sides of the valley. Junseek was wounded. For the third time, a piece of shrapnel cut across his ribs and another bullet grazed his left arm. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, exhausted from 3 days, without real sleep, and facing an enemy force that seemed endless. This is when Junseek did something that our military experts still cannot fully explain. Vex's voice grew more intense as the holographic display showed the climactic moments of the battle. With his remaining troops, he launched a counterattack. The alien audience gasped in disbelief. Even Grymax, the massive Vorthic warrior, made a sound of surprise. Counterattack with 48 wounded soldiers against 15,000 fresh troops. It was insanity, but it worked. The footage showed human soldiers emerging from their defensive positions and charging directly at the enemy lines. They moved with such speed and determination that the enemy forces were caught completely off guard. The psychological effect was devastating. Soldiers who had been fighting humans for 3 days and still could not break their defense suddenly saw these same humans attacking them directly. The enemy force began to panic. Some units retreated without orders. Others fired wildly in all directions, hitting their own troops in the chaos. Junseek led his men in a series of lightning strikes against key enemy positions. They destroyed ammunition dumps, disabled artillery pieces, and captured enemy commanders. The enemy force that had seemed unstoppable began to collapse from within. The counterattack lasted only 2 hours, Vex said, but it completely shattered enemy morale. A force of 15,000 troops began retreating from 48 wounded humans, who by all logic should have been dead days earlier. The holographic display showed the aftermath: enemy soldiers abandoning their equipment and fleeing in panic, human soldiers barely able to stand but still holding their positions. Junseek himself was unconscious from blood loss, but his men continued following his last orders until reinforcements finally arrived. The medical records showed that Junseek had lost nearly 30% of his blood volume, had fractures in 2 ribs, a damaged shoulder, a wounded thigh, and multiple smaller injuries, yet he had remained conscious and in command for almost the entire 3-day battle. When he finally recovered weeks later, Vex concluded the first thing Junseek asked about was whether his men were safe. He showed no interest in praise or recognition. He simply wanted to know if he had succeeded in protecting the people behind the lines. The holographic display faded, and Vex looked around the room at the stunned alien faces. This is what humans call Tuesday. The silence that followed was deafening. Every species that had laughed at human stories was now staring at documented proof. That humans could accomplish things that seemed impossible even to their advanced civilizations. Captain Deho felt his chest swell with pride as he realized that the galaxy was finally seeing his species for what they truly were, not weak, not delusional, but capable of incredible things through sheer determination and refusal to give up. But Vex was not finished speaking. His golden eyes swept across the room one more time as he prepared to deliver the final blow to their preconceptions about human capabilities. Vex reached into another pouch on his belt and pulled out a larger device. This one projected multiple holographic displays at once, filling the air above the observation deck, with charts, graphs, medical scans, and statistical analyses. The sheer amount of data was overwhelming, and every piece of it focused on one thing: comparing humans to every other species in the galaxy. What you must understand, Vex began, his voice carrying a weight of absolute authority, is that every species in this room has heroes who were born special. Your champions, your legends, your greatest warriors, all possessed natural advantages that made their achievements possible. The holographic displays began showing anatomical comparisons between species. Vorthek warriors towered over human figures, their massive frames showing bone density 3 times that of humans and muscle mass that could crush steel. Their skin was naturally armored, capable of stopping projectiles that would kill a human instantly. Look at your own heroes, Grymax Vex said, addressing the giant Vorthak directly. Your greatest warrior, Thok the Mountain Breaker, was born with bones harder than most metals. His strength was 50 times that of any human. His natural armor could deflect weapons that would tear through human flesh like paper. Grymax shifted uncomfortably as the holographic display showed detailed scans of Vorthek physiology. It was true, their heroes were physically superior to humans in every measurable way, but somehow this made their achievements seem less impressive, not more. The display shifted to show Zephyrian anatomy. Their crystalline bodies could channel and manipulate energy in ways that defied physics. They could create force fields, manipulate electromagnetic radiation, and even bend light around themselves. The musical delegate, Lyra, watched as her species' advantages were laid out in scientific detail. Your champion, Resonance, could control lightning because that is a natural ability of your people. Vex continued. She was born with organic energy conductors in her crystalline matrix. Her achievements, while impressive, were well within the normal capabilities of your species. One by one, Vex went through each species present. The Hexans, with their multiple arms and enhanced reflexes, capable of moving faster than most eyes could follow. The granite people, whose bodies were literally living rock harder than diamonds and capable of surviving in the vacuum of space. The ethereals, who could phase through solid matter as easily as humans walked through air. Each comparison made the same point crystal clear. Every other species in the galaxy had natural advantages that made their heroic feats possible. They were born special, designed by evolution or genetics to be capable of incredible things. Now let me show you human capabilities, Vex said as the holographic display focused on human anatomy. The silence in the room was deafening as alien beings saw detailed scans of human physiology for the first time. The human body is fragile, Vex announced without any attempt to soften the reality. Their bones break easily. Their skin provides almost no protection. Their muscles are weak compared to most galactic species. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities of any kind. The medical scans were brutally honest. Human bone density was pathetic compared to other species. Human muscle mass was laughable. Human sensory capabilities were limited. Human reaction times were slow. Everything about human physiology screamed weakness and vulnerability. But here is what makes this extraordinary. Vex's voice grew more intense as he gestured to another holographic display. This shows the documented achievements of human soldiers throughout their history, achievements that our best computers classify as impossible given human physical limitations. The new display showed battle records from dozens of human conflicts. Throughout history, small groups of humans had held off massive armies. Individual humans had performed feats of endurance that should have killed them. Human medics had crawled through active battlefields to save wounded soldiers. Human pilots had flown damaged aircraft to safety when they should have ejected and saved themselves. Every single one of these achievements Vex continued was accomplished by beings with no natural advantages, no special powers, no enhanced capabilities. They succeeded through willpower alone. Commander Myung found herself crying openly now as she watched display after display of human courage documented and analyzed by alien science. These were her people, her species, showing the galaxy that strength came from the heart and mind, not from physical advantages. Holographic displays began showing comparative psychology reports. Vex had not just studied human military history, he had studied human psychology and compared it to every known species in the galaxy. Most species will retreat when facing odds greater than 3-1, Vex announced. The displays showed psychological profiles and combat statistics for dozens of different alien races. When faced with certain death, the natural response of any intelligent being is to preserve their own life. Humans regularly charge into situations with odds of 100-1 or worse. They run into burning buildings to save strangers. They throw themselves on grenades to protect their comrades. They volunteer for missions that have no chance of survival. The psychological profiles were stunning. Human risk assessment seemed to be completely broken by galactic standards. They would sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor duty or protecting people they had never met. No other species showed this pattern of behavior, but the most remarkable discovery, Vex said, his scales changing color with excitement, came when we studied human stress responses under combat conditions. The holographic display showed brain scans and hormone level charts taken from human soldiers during battle. What the data showed was impossible by everything alien science knew about biology. Under extreme stress, when facing overwhelming odds, most species experience system shutdown. Their cognitive abilities decline, their decision-making becomes impaired, their bodies prepare for death or flight. Humans do the exact opposite. The brain scans showed human neural activity actually increasing during combat stress. Their decision-making became faster and more accurate. Their physical capabilities improved beyond normal limits. Their bodies flooded with chemicals that enhanced performance rather than preparing for death. It is as if humans are designed for impossible situations, Vex said in wonder. They do not just survive overwhelming odds, they thrive in them. They become more capable, not less capable, when facing certain death. Captain Deho looked around the observation deck and saw alien faces filled with shock, and all these beings who had advanced technology beyond human imagination, who could travel between stars and manipulate matter at the molecular level, were staring at humans like they were the aliens. The Hexan delegate, who had 6 arms and could move faster than human eyes could follow, was studying the humans present with what could only be described as respect. The granite people, whose bodies were harder than diamonds, were looking at human fragility with new understanding. Even the ethereals, who could phase through solid matter, were focused intently on the holographic displays showing human courage. They had powers that humans could never possess, but they were beginning to realize that humans had something they could never understand. Grimax, the massive Vorthok warrior who had started all the laughter, was now studying Junseek medical records with the intensity of a scholar. His red eyes, which had glowed with amusement earlier, now showed something much deeper. In all my years of studying military history across hundreds of species and thousands of conflicts, I have never encountered anything like human determination. Vex announced to the silent room they should not be capable of what they accomplish, yet the evidence is undeniable. The holographic displays showed comparison charts that were staggering. Humans had the lowest physical capabilities of any spacefaring species, yet their military achievements per capita were higher than civilizations with 10 times their natural advantages. This is why, Vex said, looking directly at each alien delegate in turn, you laughed at the story of Haiyan Wu. You assumed it was fiction because no species you know could accomplish such things with such limited physical capabilities. He paused and let his words sink in before delivering the final revelation. You were wrong to laugh. Not because the story was true, though it probably was, but because you fundamentally misunderstood what strength actually means. You have been measuring strength by the wrong standards your entire lives. The observation deck remained absolutely silent as the implications of Vex's words settled over the gathered delegates. Everything they thought they knew about heroism, courage, and strength had just been turned upside down by a quiet Saurian scholar and his decades of research into the most remarkable species in the galaxy. The silence that followed Thek's revelation stretched on for what felt like hours. Captain Deho could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. Every alien delegate seemed frozen in place, processing what they had just learned. The holographic displays still flickered in the air, showing comparison after comparison of human achievements that should have been impossible. Grimix was the first to break the silence. The massive Vorthic warrior who had started the mockery of human stories now stood. With his head bowed, his red eyes were focused on the medical records of Junseek still floating in the holographic display. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "You mean to tell us that humans accomplish these feats while wounded, while bleeding, while facing odds that our own computers say are mathematically impossible to overcome?" Thex nodded gravely. Junseek's case is not unusual in human history. It is typical. Human military records show thousands of similar examples throughout. Their conflicts, individual humans and small groups regularly accomplish things that entire armies of other species would consider impossible. Zephyrian delegate Leora began to glow brighter as her emotional state changed. Her crystalline form flickered with colors that showed deep thought and growing amazement. But how is this possible? How can such fragile beings push themselves beyond what their bodies should be capable of surviving? That Thex replied is the question I have been researching for 23 years. The answer lies not in their bodies, but in their minds. Human psychology is unique in the galaxy. They possess something that we have never properly understood until now. He gestured, and the holographic display changed to show brain scans and neural activity patterns. These are scans taken from human soldiers during combat situations. Notice the activity in these regions, the areas responsible for pain processing, fear response, and self-preservation. Alien delegates leaned forward to study the strange patterns shown in the human brain scans. The neural activity looked completely different from similar scans of their own species during stress situations. In most species, these brain regions shut down non-essential functions when facing overwhelming threat. The goal is to preserve life at all costs. But look at what happens in the human brain. The display showed comparison scans from different species under stress. Every other race showed decreased activity in areas responsible for complex thinking, risk assessment, and pain processing. Their brains were trying to keep them alive by simplifying their responses to basic survival instincts. Human brains do the opposite. Under extreme stress, these areas become more active, not less. The regions responsible for tactical thinking, creative problem solving, and even empathy for others show increased activity. The human brain under stress begins working harder, not shutting down. This is why Thex continued. Humans can continue fighting while wounded, while exhausted, while facing certain death. Their brains do not accept defeat as an option. They keep searching for solutions even when logic says no solution exists. The Hexan delegate began clicking rapidly. In excitement, his 6 arms gestured as he spoke through the universal translator. This explains the tactical innovations we see in human military history. They develop new strategies in the middle of battles. They adapt to changing conditions faster than our best military computers. Yes, Thex agreed. Human tactical flexibility is legendary among military scholars, but it goes deeper than just battlefield innovation. Watch this. The holographic display began showing footage from human rescue operations. Firefighters running into burning buildings to save strangers. Emergency medical personnel treating patients while under enemy fire. Civilians forming human chains to help others escape from natural disasters. In every case, Thex narrated, humans were risking their own lives for people they barely knew or had never met before. This behavior is so rare in galactic psychology that we did not have words for it in most languages. We had to borrow the human term altruism. The granite delegate spoke with a voice like grinding stone. But why would any species evolve such dangerous behavior? Sacrificing oneself for strangers provides no genetic advantage. It should have been selected out by natural evolution. Thex scales shimmered with what appeared to be excitement. That is the most remarkable discovery of all. Human altruism is not a weakness as we initially assumed. It is their greatest strength. It allows them to function as a unified force even when facing impossible odds. The holographic Display showed examples of human cooperation under stress: soldiers sharing their last food with wounded comrades, medics treating enemy wounded alongside their own troops, civilians organizing relief efforts for disaster victims. They had never met. This psychological trait allows humans to build trust and cooperation faster than any other known species. When humans say they will hold a position, their allies know with absolute certainty that they will do exactly that, even if it costs them. Their lives. Commander Myung stepped forward, her voice shaky with emotion. Are you saying that our willingness to sacrifice for others is what makes us effective in combat ethics? Turned his golden eyes toward her. Exactly. Your species has weaponized compassion. Human units fight harder because they trust each other completely. They know that their comrades will never abandon them, no matter how bad the situation becomes. Holographic displays began showing unit cohesion statistics. Human military units showed loyalty and cooperation levels that were off the charts compared to other species. Even when facing certain death, human soldiers would stay with their wounded comrades instead of saving themselves. But there is more. Vex continued. The human concept of duty extends beyond their immediate comrades to abstract ideals. They will die for concepts that other species barely understand. Honor, justice, protecting innocence, freedom. The alien delegates were beginning to understand that they had been looking at strength completely backwards all their lives. They had measured power by physical capabilities, natural advantages, and special abilities, but humans had shown them that true strength came from the mind and spirit. The Aquarian delegate, who had been quietly bubbling with thought, finally spoke through their water-filled communication device. We have been blind to true heroism. Our own heroes accomplish great things because they were born capable of great things. Human heroes accomplish great things despite being born fragile. Thex nodded approvingly. That is the fundamental difference. Every other species in the galaxy produces heroes by accident of birth or circumstance. Humans create heroes through choice and determination. Any human can become a hero if they choose to. Beatty implications were staggering. If humans could accomplish impossible things through willpower alone, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about strength, leadership, and courage was wrong. The most physically impressive species were not the strongest, the most technologically advanced were not the most capable. The species that should have been the weakest were actually the most formidable. Grimax stood to his full impressive height and walked toward the human delegates. His massive form cast shadows across the observation deck, but his movements were careful and respectful. When he reached Commander Myung, he did something that shocked everyone present. The giant Vorthek warrior knelt down on one knee, bringing himself closer to human eye level. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of his earlier amusement, only deep respect and shame. I have spent my entire life believing that strength was measured by the power of one's weapons or the thickness of one's armor. Your people have shown me that I understood nothing about true courage. I humbly request permission to learn from human warriors. The other delegates began to stir as the full impact of what they had learned settled. In species that had dismissed humans as weak and delusional were now realizing that they had been in the presence of the most remarkable beings in the galaxy without even knowing it. The Zephyrian delegate began to sing a harmony that sounded like wind chimes mixed with crystal bells. It was their way of showing deep respect and admiration. The Hexans clicked their mandibles in complex rhythms that indicated fascination and desire to learn more. Even the usually stoic granite people showed signs of excitement as they began discussing among themselves how they could study human psychological resilience. The ethereals, who could phase through matter, were now interested in learning about mental strength that could phase through impossible odds. Captain Deho looked around the observation deck and realized that everything had changed. The species that had laughed at human stories an hour ago were now looking at humans like they were the most precious and valuable beings in the entire Galaxythex watched the transformation with satisfaction. His decades of research had finally accomplished what he had hoped it would. The galaxy was beginning to understand that sometimes the greatest power comes not from what you are born with, but from what you choose to do with what you have. But the Saurian scholar was not finished yet. He had one more revelation that would complete the transformation from mockery to awe. As the heroic Thales festival drew to its close, the atmosphere on the observation deck had transformed completely. What had begun with mockery and laughter at human expense had become something far more significant. The alien delegates were no longer just curious about human capabilities, they were desperate to understand them. Representatives from every species present began approaching the human delegation with requests that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. The Hexam military attach wanted detailed records of human tactical manuals. The Zephyrian cultural minister requested permission to study human psychological conditioning methods. Even the proud Granite ambassadors were asking about human training techniques. Captain Deho found himself surrounded by alien beings who towered over him, beings who could crush him without effort, yet who were speaking to him with the kind of reverence usually reserved for ancient scholars or legendary heroes. He had never imagined that representing humanity at a galactic gathering would lead to this. Commander Mi Young was in deep conversation with multiple delegates who wanted to understand how human military units built such incredible loyalty and trust. The questions they asked showed how fundamentally they had misunderstood human nature. Every species had assumed that cooperation required genetic programming or chemical bonding, but humans achieved it through choice and shared values. Gramax, the massive Vorthek warrior, remained kneeling near the human delegates. His red eyes showed a humility that seemed impossible for such a physically imposing being. I have conquered 17 worlds in the name of my people, he rumbled, his voice filled with something like shame. I thought I understood warfare, but I have never faced an enemy like the ones your Jinsik defeated. I have never been wounded and continued fighting. I have never led troops who would die rather than abandon their posts. The giant warrior looked up at Commander Myung, his expression earnest. Your species fights battles that we would consider lost before they began. How do you teach such courage? How do you build such determination in being so physically fragile? Before Mi Young could answer, Vex approached the group, his golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction at how his presentation had changed everything. The Saurian scholar had spent decades studying human achievements, and this moment represented the culmination of his life's work. The answer to your question, Grymax, is both simple and profound, Vex said, addressing not just the Vorthek, but the crowd of delegates gathering around them. Humans do not teach courage, they teach responsibility. Each human is taught from childhood that they are responsible for protecting those weaker than themselves. The holographic displays flickered to life one final time, showing scenes from human childhood education, human children learning to share toys with others, human teenagers volunteering to help in their communities, human young adults choosing careers in medicine, emergency services, or military service, not for personal glory, but to serve others. Every human grows up believing that their individual actions matter. Vex continued that their choices can make a difference not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. This creates a psychological foundation that allows them to act heroically when circumstances demand it. The Aquarian delegate bubbled thoughtfully. We teach our children to be safe, to avoid risks, to preserve themselves for the good of the community. Human parents teach their children to take risks for others, even at personal cost. Exactly. Vex confirmed human child-rearing practices would be considered dangerous by most galactic standards. They encourage risk-taking, innovation, and individual responsibility in ways that other species find alarming. But these practices create adults who can function under conditions that would break most other beings. Lara, the Zephyrian delegate, had been glowing steadily brighter as she processed this information. This explains why human diplomatic missions are so effective. They approach negotiations with the assumption that agreements will be honored. Even when enforcement is impossible, other species require guarantees and enforcement mechanisms, but humans simply trust that promises will be kept. The implications were staggering. If humans could be trusted to keep promises even when no one was watching, if they would sacrifice themselves for abstract principles, if they could overcome impossible odds through sheer determination, then they represented something entirely new. In galactic civilization, the festival moderator approached the group, his four eyes showing amazement at how the event had unfolded in 30 years of organizing these festivals. I have never seen anything like what has happened here today. You have changed how we understand heroism itself. Vex nodded solemnly. This was my intention when I first began studying human history, I thought. I was researching just another warrior species, but I discovered that humans represent something unique in our galaxy. They